Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Royer, and I'm the project coordinator of the Montana Rural Health Initiative. The mission of RHI is to engage partners, to share ideas and expertise, and to support communities in improving health while stimulating a higher level of wellness across the state. Thank you all for joining us today for the Montana Healthy Communities webinar, presented by Lori Christenson of the Gallatin City County Health Department, TracyMenuez, the Special Projects Officer of the Human Resource Development Council, and Cathy Costakis with Montana Office of Rural Health and AHEC with Montana State University. Before we get started, I'll go over a couple of technical details. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. At that point, I will unmute everybody. So if you don't have a question, you want to mute your line again. You can also submit questions in the chat box throughout the duration of the presentation. Make sure if you do a chat box that you put it to all participants and not just the host. If you have a question just for me, you can send it just to host. So once the webinar is over, you will have an opportunity to provide valuable feedback through an RHI brief survey. It will automatically pop up in your window, and it's only about 8 questions, so it should be fairly easy. Okay, thank you again for joining us today. I will roll the ball over to Lori, and she can begin.
So this morning, Cathy, Tracy, and I are going to present a presentation about the Big Sky Villas Rehabilitation Project, which is a health impact assessment related to housing and health. And so today, we're going to focus on I'll give you a brief introduction and background, as well as go over some of our assessment findings, our monitoring and evaluation plans, and then also any lessons learned that we will share with you all. And first of all, I wanted to just mention that when we think about HIAs or think about housing in general, a lot of times we're all have forgotten, at least at some level, that much of our health is dictated by where we live, what surrounds us at all times. And this is Richard Jackson. If you're not familiar with Richard Jackson, he's done some extensive work in the impact of the environment on health, relating particularly to children. And if you want some more information about Richard Jackson and his work, just simply Google Richard Jackson, and a whole host of information will come up. But really, this is why, in public health, we look at all the different impacts. And thinking about housing in particular, housing matters to health. You can think about quality, the quality of the infrastructure, how affordable it is, its actual physical location, as well as the community that's built around it, as well as the community within it. And what I mean by that is within the housing structure or within the housing units. So it's no surprise that when we think about housing, housing really does make up a significant amount of most Americans' monthly cost, as well as, and we can say that very comfortably even here in Gallatin County, and I think we can say that across the state of Montana. So the amount of time and the money invested is why housing really becomes what we consider in public health a social determinant of health, or something that is an environmental or societal factor that affects how healthy a person is. So when you think about housing, unhealthy housing is really a near guarantee of poor health outcomes, and housing can then actually be looked at as a public health solution, and a unique solution that we don't typically always think of. So jumping into what is a health impact assessment. So a health impact assessment is something that helps, it's an assessment that helps identify the potential health effects of a particular project, proposal, and its intention is to optimize health benefits and mitigate health risks. And when we also think about HIAs, the process itself really brings together a lot of the expertise and strengths of different sectors in ways that, again, that we don't usually tap into. And the idea is to promote the best quality of life for community members as possible. And when we think about health impact assessment and why, we were really looking at it as a county, we really wanted to look at those who endure health inequities, to really ensure that the housing project itself, that we'll go into a little bit more detail, really reflects the concerns and aspirations of the residents themselves. So why do an HIA? I've bolded some of the the components that were really important for us. But there's a whole list of these reasons. But one of the things that I really wanted to focus on is that explicit focus on equity. And what we mean by equity is, and equity in health means that everyone should have a fair opportunity to attain their full potential, and really more pragmatically that no one should be disadvantaged from achieving this potential if it can be avoided. But also, too, it connects public health and urban rural planning. It ensures involvement of the community, and then raises really the profile of health in other sectors, and again, in places we typically don't think of health. So what happens in an HIA, this is just a quick diagram that explains looking at how does this project, plan, or policy, how will it affect these specific health outcomes. And HIAs have been done in housing, they've been done on transportation, a lot of actually have been done around transportation and more around housing in the last little bit, in the last decade. So what we really also like about the HIA process is that it's very defined. I don't want to say it's prescriptive because it does kind of go back and forth. It's not a linear process. Sometimes you're in screening and you jump down into scoping and you go back into screening. But it is essentially a 6-step process that includes looking at the value of the HIA. Do we need to do an HIA? Is there a need? Looking into scoping, we're identifying which health effects to consider. Are we talking about, asthma-related conditions, or are we talking about physical activity? And then in the year assessment phase, we're really looking at providing a profile of existing health conditions and then evaluating any potential health impacts. And then in your recommendation phase, you're looking at suggested changes to a proposal, and this is where really that project team is coming up with some suggestions or solutions to promote that positive health effects or to mitigate adverse health effects. And then the reporting, that's a lot of what we're doing actually today and continue to do, is we're sharing and presenting not only the results to decision makers, but also interested parties. And then lastly, the monitoring and evaluation. Just like a lot of what we do in our projects, this piece is oftentimes neglected, but it's built in and baked into this process so that we can look at the decision-making process. Did it have an impact? And then the impact of the decisions on health. And of course, some of these happen much later down the road. And for those of you who are on the phone that work at local health departments or are familiar with community health improvement plans, this HIA process really connects to what we do in local health departments to work with communities to improve identified priorities. And for our community health improvement plan, the areas of opportunity that were that are highlighted to the right and boxed in looked at mental health, nutrition, physical activity, and tobacco use as priority areas in our community. And working with HRDC and in the housing sector, we really had the opportunity here in this HIA to start addressing some of these downstream effects, if you will, of mental health. So a little bit about the background specifically for this project. This particular project, this HIA, examines the health impacts of the rehabilitation proposal for the Big Sky Villas apartment. It's an affordable family housing complex pictured there on the right and located in Belgrade. And so in our screening process, we looked at, is health being considered already? Is it feasible for us to work with HRDC? Do we have the resources? And what are the health issues that are specifically involved? And just a little bit more about Big Sky Villas. The Big Sky Villas was constructed in 1984 and had few major improvements to the property since then. And HRDC Human Resource Development Council had proposed to purchase the property to extend affordability restrictions and rehabilitate the units and the property. And this particular building in particular would continue to fill a strong need in the Belgrade community for affordable rental housing. And if most of you know or have heard that Gallatin County is growing exponentially. So looking at the effects of housing and how we can really design and rehabilitate current housing is a priority issue. And then we also had a lot of interest from HRDC to work with the health department. There were some visionaries at HRDC that were really open to working with us and trying to establish, a deeper relationship, so we could look at some of the health-based evidence to influence their decision-making process, and also looking at other future planning HRDC properties in the future. And the other piece that was really interesting and kind of happened kind of all at the same time was that this particular HIA was aligned with some planned revisions for the City of Belgrade's transportation plan and an update to the Belgrade area growth policy. So we really had an opportunity to leverage the collective interest of our project team and recommend some solutions that went into these plans as well, that could go into these plans. Okay, so this is Big Sky Villas. Big Sky Villas is located in the red box, and Jackrabbit Lane runs north and south. You can see just to the west, excuse me, and that's a major intersection. And then we have Jefferson Avenue, which is a major route for kids to take to school. And then you can see just across Jackrabbit Lane, there's the Albertsons, which is a grocery store, as well as another grocery store just to the north. So there's commercial, retail, and residential, and walking location from Big Sky Villas. So again, in our scoping phase, I'm kind of walking you guys through this process so you have a good idea of you can kind of follow along in terms of our assessment process. So in our scoping phase, we developed our goals, and then as well in our scoping phase, we developed our research questions. So in scoping, again, we're really trying to identify who our stakeholders were and what their roles were going to be, and what were the timeframes. So this is when we were really developing what that looks like for this particular project. Is it going to be a partnership? Is it going to be placation? And for HRDC and for our project team, we were really looking for this level of partnership. So we created a communication and stakeholder engagement plan that reflected that level of involvement. So from all of the information that we collected during our screening and scoping phase, as well as a little bit of our assessment phase, we developed what's called a pathway diagram. And for a lot of you, this looks a lot like a logic model, and in essence, it really is. But what we're doing is we're demonstrating the links between health determinants and potential outcomes. So when we change the quality of place, or if we change and make the units more safe and secure, what kind of potential health impacts would those be? So those are the potential health impacts are all the way to the right. So we can see changes in stress and depression and anxiety, changes in chronic conditions, et cetera, as a result of the decision to rehabilitate Big Sky Villas. So jumping into the assessment phase, this piece had both qualitative and quantitative research methods. We used existing health data, which is that community health assessment. A lot of you probably have access to that. We also used American Community Survey. We also had access to a market study that was done for Big Sky Villas prepared for HRDC. So we had a lot of existing data. We also collected and chose to collect primary data, which was through our Big Sky Villas HIA survey. And we also conducted a community engagement or mapping workshop. And as I've said, and this is you'll hear this throughout our whole presentation, the engagement of residents and having them be part of the conversation was paramount in terms of how we designed the process and really why we undertook this particular HIA. So this community engagement workshop, I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail here. We invited community member residents of the Big Sky Villas to the local Chamber of Commerce. where we had HRDC staff available. We also had the survey available. We had the staff, HRDC staff there available to talk, like I said, about the relocation process itself. But then we also conducted what's called a place mapping exercise. And you'll see in that bottom right-hand corner, we had a large map that actually MDT printed for us. And this was something that we broke out into 2 different groups with the residents. And we asked them each to identify through those sticky dots, the red, green, yellow, what were the community assets, what were some community liabilities, things that they were concerned about, and what were some of their ideas for suggested improvements. So we broke out into 2 of these groups. We had Sharpies. Everybody was writing down their thoughts and ideas. And then we were able to develop, this is a combined map. I know it's pretty hard for you guys to see this, but essentially it's a combined map of all the assets and liabilities. And you can see, I'll point with my finger here. So the green space here is Big Sky Villas, and you can see all these red areas here are places where they identified as dangerous intersections. And if you can think about, if there's any planners on the phone or anybody who works with planning departments, this is a great tool that they can use to identify, areas of need identified by community members as dangerous intersections or areas of improvement. So based on all both the qualitative and quantitative research methods and those inputs from our residents, we identified key themes, which were safe, secure housing, which meant access to services and amenities, and improved housing conditions in the rehabilitated units themselves, the quality of place, which is the actual infrastructure, and then the quality of place, the community attributes and amenities, so what is located around the unit and how safe the areas around Big Sky Villas are as well. And I'm going to read a definition that we used as a project team to define quality of place. And we defined it as the physical characteristics of the public and private space in and around Big Sky Villas that contribute positively to residents' health and well-being. So this includes, as I said, the building itself, the grounds, and the surrounding neighborhood. So at this time, I am going to pass over the mic to Tracy, who will dive deeper into safe and secure housing and some of the recommendations that we created to help highlight the importance of looking at these particular health determinants.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Can everyone hear me? I'm hoping yes.
You're good to go. We hear you.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you, Lori. So as you can see on this first slide, really some of the recommendations just come around making sure that we're providing adequate information to the tenants, and then that we're also providing them with an opportunity to really have a role in both the rehabilitation, but then just also the long-term management, and really empowering them to be more involved in both their resident but in their community as a whole. So, one of the recommendations that came out was that we should create and foster a residence council for the Big Sky Villas apartments after they've been completed. And, this process of resident engagement has been really helpful in identifying people who might want to lead that effort. And I think that over 50% of the people responding to the survey said that they had a real interest in participating with a resident council. So that provides them with an opportunity to more actively play a role in that community. We talked a lot, one of the things that was really weighing heavily on everyone's mind is just this temporary relocation. It's obviously, this is a family property. We oftentimes work with properties that maybe don't have children living in them, so we don't necessarily have to look at a school year schedule. So we wanted to spend a lot of time with them talking about how we could minimize the disruptions to family life and people who are working, and make sure that they're able to maintain their social and their work obligations within the community. And so originally our relocation schedule and our rehabilitation schedule was looking at just doing the whole property at one time. And upon talking with the tenants and going back and doing some work with our architect, we realized that we could do this in more of a phased approach and work in pods in the building with really minimal cost added to the project and keeping people out of their homes for shorter periods of time. So we'll be working on 6 different pods of the building rather than just doing the whole rehabilitation at once. And then just really keeping them informed as much as possible. And we'll talk in lessons learned about, what we're learning about how we can engage with residents. But what we heard from them was that they really just have a need for information, and that if we're not providing information sort of gets created in a vacuum. So it's best to provide information as we have it available. I think you can go to the next one, Lori. Thanks. Before we were approached in order to participate in this process, there were quite a few things we were already doing with the project, and some of these are things that happen almost always with affordable housing projects that are looking to utilize state and federal programs, whether it be grants or tax credits. But we really thought that these were some solid things that every project could really look at doing as they're looking at providing affordable housing or even just market rate housing, but to make sure that these things are being done. The first one, we heard a lot from the tenants about noise mitigation, that it's an older building and it's very loud. And so we will be focusing a lot of our efforts on increasing the insulation between units in order to keep those noise disturbances down. Another thing that we did was relocated the playground slightly because it used to back right up to one tenant's apartment. By moving the playground slightly, that'll provide a little bit of a noise barrier for that tenant. We recommend that everybody use the green building and energy conservation standards that have been developed by the State Department of Commerce. That helps both with enhancing energy efficiency, but then also just reducing the waste from construction and any toxins and chemicals that might be construction byproducts. And then finally, we are increasing the accessibility of the units. So we'll be adding one more accessible unit. We are widening doorways and adding also a unit that is accessible for people with vision and hearing disabilities. I think that's it on that one, Lori. Thanks. And then finally, we're working really closely. The tenants really did, their input was that they really were interested in a community garden. So we are working with the tenants very closely to put the community garden into place and figure out locations, and then just simply, how does that get administered over time, wanting to make sure that there's a really active role with that. And then we found that there was quite a bit of confusion regarding smoking policies in our survey, and then just also in our on-site observations. The smoking policy, nobody was really sure what it was. So we want to make sure that we're very clear, and that's really quite easy to do when you're bringing in new management. It's nice to establish the new protocol for smoking policies. And then finally, we talked about the design of the park. As you heard me say, we've already relocated the park slightly to provide better noise mitigation, but we'll be working with the tenants in the final design phase of the park to kind of figure out what amenities are most important and how to kind of have a balance between providing a level of separation that creates safety for the children that are using the park, but that also promotes some intergenerational access.
Okay, I think that means me. This is Cathy, Costakis, and can you guys hear me? Did I do that right? I hope so. So I'm going to be talking about the community attributes and amenities, the area outside of actually the physical structure and the property surrounding. I'm talking about the streets, the neighborhoods, the access to services, and we all know that people just don't live in their in their homes. They live in their community. And so understanding how that community, how they're able to access what they need to go, where they need to go, and how safe is that for them, for everybody, including all ages and abilities. So we spent a lot of time kind of doing walking audits around the community, around the actual Big Sky Villas, to understand where people go. Even in the survey, asking them where do they go, how often do they go, what mode of transportation do they take to get there, and so several years ago, a couple years ago, Belgrade attended the Building Active Communities Initiative, and I can talk to people more about that. We have a link to our program at the end, but it's a program of the State Department of Health, and we work with communities all over the state to try to help them make their communities more walkable and bikeable and just safe and places where people can be active. And so in going to that, the city of Belgrade actually adopted a resolution they called it a safe and usable streets policy, and other places have called these types of policies complete streets policies. So they actually have something that says that any newly constructed or reconstructed roads must be designed and constructed for all users, so pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, motorists of all ages and abilities. And then not just along the corridor, but across. So crossing the street is also very important. So we wanted to make sure that the city of Belgrade included the Big Sky Villa residents in order to make the area around Big Sky Villas more safe and usable and bicycle and pedestrian friendly. So go ahead, Lori. So as Lori pointed out, there's Jackrabbit Lane. It's a big corridor that really separates Big Sky Villas from a local grocery store and other services that they could get to. It's a very difficult crossing and actually not even recommended at the point where it's the most convenient for the residents to cross the street. So we want to make sure in this upcoming transportation plan that Belgrade really engages the Big Sky Villa residents and all really low-income residents in the community, because sometimes those are people that aren't necessarily engaged, or isn't so easy to get them to come to meetings that you just post a public meeting and you expect people to show up. Well, we want them to do some extra efforts to engage this community to get their perspective. And okay, moving along. And so really we sat and observed the area around Big Sky Villa and found that people, were having difficulty. I watched this man try to cross the street, not even Jackrabbit Lane, it's just the Jefferson Lane to get to some services across the street, and he took a long time because people whip around from Jackrabbit at high speeds, and you can see that the corner is very wide, and you can do it at pretty high speeds. So those are some of the things we look at as to how safe is this for residents to even just get across the street. Okay, go ahead. And so this is what he was trying to access. So there's a McDonald's, a Taco Bell, and so not necessarily the most healthy, although you can find healthy options at these restaurants, but these are the closest places, and that is also something typical that you find in areas close to low-income residents. So not only getting across the street to the grocery store is much more difficult even than this street to access. Okay, next slide. And so we also wanted to make sure that whenever they hire the consultants to do this transportation plan update, that they make sure that this consultant really understands the principles of healthy community design and safe routes to school, and that they really will, have a focus on engaging. Sorry, hold on one second. Engaging the community. Next slide. So this is actually Jefferson right in front of the Big Sky Villas, and you can see there is a sidewalk surrounding Big Sky Villas, but it's very difficult. There's no real crosswalk to get across the street. And actually on the side of the street that has Big Sky Villas, there is no sidewalk that is continuous. So when kids go to school, they actually have to cross this street in order to get to where the sidewalk is, which is on only one side of the street. And so really understanding, what are those kinds of things that need to happen to make sure that this is a safe crossing for them to do that. Okay, next slide. And this is sort of the route to school. So it's a pretty busy street, and there could be some traffic calming done or some better facilities for walking and biking that could be put on this street. Next slide. And when they actually get to the school, there are some really good crosswalks and some curb cuts, but I noticed that there's one on the right that actually leads to a place where there is no sidewalk. So you have this nice crosswalk, but then you're left at a place where you really don't have a facility that's safe. And we talked to many of the Big Sky Villa residents, and there are several children that really they have no other way to get to school other than riding their bike or walking. And we heard from many of the parents that actually don't allow their kids to walk to school because they feel it's unsafe, that they felt that it was something really important that needed to change to make it safer for these kids. Next slide. Okay, that's it. Okay, well, this is Lori again, and I'm just going to go quickly over our monitoring and evaluation plan. So you saw the recommendations that we came up with. We've written a report, so you're probably asking what's next. How you can make sure that work continues. So what we did was we established in our monitoring and evaluation plan, essentially this table. This is just a snippet of our entire table that goes through each of the recommendations, assigns who would be the monitoring lead, identifies who those collaborating partners would be, and then we've decided as a project team, as part of our monitoring plan, is to meet on a quarterly basis to look at the level of implementation for each of these and trying to troubleshoot if we were at a stage where we knew it wasn't going to be adopted, to try and figure out how we could work with our community partners to ensure that those recommendations are fully considered. So this, again, we are only 3 on this call right now, but we also had the Belgrade City Planning Director, his name is Jason Karp. He was actively involved in this as well and is part of our monitoring and evaluation plan. We also have Dr. Carmen Biker-Shank. She's from MSU, and she helped us with the assessment and the analysis of the resident data as well. So I'm just going to go into a quick conversation about the benefits of this HIA, and also I want to make sure that Tracy's voice is heard here too. So when we think about the benefits of this HIA, we really looked at the number and the range of impacted people and partners. So it wasn't just HRDC and the health department and MSU working on this. Again, like I said, it included the city of Belgrade. We had conversations with the county planning. It really started just to elevate health in these conversations where they weren't necessarily considered before. And part of that is looking at how we can use this as a meaningful cross-sector collaboration or a tool that we can make sure that we're having these conversations with our planners. Their health is more frequently at the table in terms of some of those decision-making processes. And the other benefit, and I think Tracy can really speak to this, so I'll turn it over to the next slide for her, but it really was an ability to address the community concerns, so the residents' concerns early on in the planning process. There were some things that HRDC was able to change kind of midstream because of what we were hearing in the assessment phase. So Tracy, I'll let you go ahead and take this last slide.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think that was one of the real benefits for us was, it provided a real framework for resident engagement and discussion. And I think oftentimes when we're working in affordable housing development, we can get very quickly caught up in kind of the quagmires of all the funding sources we're working with and what we're doing. And I think for us, it was very helpful to me because it was a very constant reminder and a framework of how can I go back and talk with the residents. and it really did create some great partnerships for us. I think as well, it really elevated a process for the residents to understand how they could play a larger role, not just in this project, but also in their community at large. I don't know that without this, they might not have necessarily had access to the Belgrade City Planner to go in and talk. And even though that access is always available, they may not have felt that it was available to them. And so having a Belgrade City Planner come to them, hear their concerns about their neighborhood and walkability, and then to realize that there was a process, where they could be further engaged in creating a better community. I think that was fantastic for them. And it really did create some decision points for us, where particularly with the rehabilitation, but also in just how we were going to be able to engage with our residents. Lessons learned on it. I think that we've engaging the residents has been a huge priority. It has been more difficult than I would like it to have been, simply because of how many funding partners are involved. And oftentimes, before I can actually come back and say, this is what's happening, I'm waiting to hear back from 5 different funding partners that can indeed happen. So I've learned lessons of, this is what's going to happen, and then I find out from a funding partner, well, it can't happen that way, and then I have to kind of go back and tell the story. And so I think that, the residents I try to communicate with them as much as I can about where we are in the process. We are obviously further behind where we'd like to be, just given all of the funding sources involved. But we've really tried to keep the residents engaged and knowing that when it is time for us to actually do a relocation, that we will give them ample time and what we'll be able to do to assist them with that process.
Okay, so this is Lori again. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of folks that helped us with this as well. We had NACCHO. This is a grant that was provided to us through NACCHO, which is a National Association of County and City Health Officials. Obviously, we had HRDC, our whole entire project team, and we had a mentor as well from the Vermont Department of Health provided to us through NACCHO. And then, of course, the residents of Big Sky Villas. We really wouldn't have been able to do this project with them if they weren't interested in wanting to make their community a better place. And then this last slide, we wanted to provide you all with some helpful resources. So we not only do we have the link to our full reports, we also have the Building Active Communities Initiative link here, as well as if you're really interested in learning a little bit more about health impact assessments and specifically housing and health impact assessments, there's a whole list of places here that you can take a look at. And I think when we can send this to all of you who are on this call so you can have those links available to you. So at that time, we can open it up for questions.
So we have a couple typed in questions on the right side. I have, during Lori's presentation, I'm curious about survey participation rate and methods of survey distribution.
Sure. I can go ahead and answer that question. So we had a 46% participation rate in the survey, which is pretty darn good, especially potentially for this demographic. And so we did a couple of things. One, we had the print survey available for residents at that community meeting. And we also went out twice to the actual Big Sky Villa residents and set up a table and had the surveys available. And we had that place mapping exercise available for them as well, for those who weren't able to come to the engagement workshop. I'd say that at that engagement workshop, the residents also said this, that they would have wished that there had been more people there that that had participated and could participate. But we also had a really great connection with the property manager who kind of went around door to door to make sure that people were filling out that survey and getting it back to her. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, it looks like we have another typed in question. It's who funded the healthy home rehabilitation at Big Sky Villas, and how are you prioritizing the projects with partners?
This is Tracy. I can go ahead and answer that. So this project, it has multiple funding streams, as I alluded to. It was constructed in the mid-'80s with Rural Development 515 funds. So part of those Rural Development 515 funds means that 21 of the 24 units come with rental assistance attached to them. So when we were in this process, of course, Rural Development is a major funding partner, and they have to approve the sale of the property to HRDC and agree to transfer the remaining mortgage on the property to HRDC and then transfer the rental assistance to us. So that's one key funding source. So that's funding part of the acquisition. The rehabilitation itself is being primarily funded through low-income housing tax credits, which we applied for these credits through the Montana Board of Housing. And we were awarded $2.6 million in tax credits for that process. And then finally, we have a Home Investment Partnerships grant, also through the Montana Department of Commerce, that is in the amount of just over $800,000 that will go to funding rehabilitation and relocation.
And then we also have another question on the right. Do you maybe see that one as well?
Oh, how are we prioritizing the projects with partners? Can you provide a little bit more background for what, Amy? Since I know.
Sorry.
Yeah,
just make sure everyone, when you're typing in questions, to address to all participants. And this one is from, let's see, this is from Gary Gannon, and it says, are you planning to dive deeper into evaluating other social determinants of health?
Lori, I might let Lori answer that one.
Yep, I can take that one. Thanks for that question. So I think what you mean by dive deeper is are we looking as a local community to identify other ways in which we can impact some of those social determinants of health. Obviously, housing is a major piece of that. So really this HIA for us as a local health department was kind of getting one HIA under our belt. It was a tremendous learning curve. We've never done an HIA before. So really we anticipate being more actively involved in looking at not only housing, but some of those other built environment pieces of our planning process that we as public health professionals can add deeper knowledge to the table in terms of how their decision-making processes will impact health in the long term. So this is just really the tip of the iceberg for us. We're hoping to have lots more projects like this in the future.
Wonderful. I don't see any other typed in questions. I don't think I'm going to unmute anyone. I think the questions chatting has been working. So if you have any more, type them in right now. Okay. Oh, here we have another one. So this one was shared privately, but I'll just read it out. Is there an opportunity to help with future HIAs? This is from Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Gary, for that question. I think what it's important to do is look at the health impact project, and if you mean locally here in Gallatin County, certainly you feel like you can reach out to me directly. But I also think that you can look to see if there's other opportunities or even other projects that you can look at in your own community. There's lots of different ways to do an HIA. You can do a rapid HIA. This was a lengthier process just because we did have some funding attached to it. But certainly I think that there's a lot of opportunities to become involved in health impact assessment work and looking at health and health policies.
Okay, perfect. Well, if there are any other questions, I will switch over to the mini grant application. We're going to have Kristen Juilliard talk about that for a minute. So if you want to do, there's 3 tabs at the top, and you can click on the mini grant tab. And then you also can save this document by pressing File, Save, Document. So I'll just have Chris walk you through it, and you can ask her any questions you have. So you can go ahead and unmute your line, Chris.
Rural Health and Area Health Education Center. And I'm really pleased we've been able to revive our mini grant program that we had a few years ago through the Rural Health Initiative, and it's an outcome of the Montana Healthy Communities Conference. So these are meant to be, they're small grants targeted to communities. We're especially looking for communities that have difficulty finding other access to funding sources. So with an emphasis kind of on the rural and frontier communities or projects that are fairly small in nature. And the projects are designed to stimulate thinking and opportunities to pull together sectors to look at projects that improve the health in the community. So the process is pretty simple, and we're looking for projects that involved 2 or more organizations, so that kind of push the kind of collaboration that you were hearing about on the call today, and that focus on things that really can be shown to kind of improve the health of a community, and so we're looking for multi-sector collaborations. Whoever applies as the applicant would need to be from a nonprofit or a government entity or 501c3, just for the purposes of the project. So that would need to be one of the partners or fiscal agent for the project. What we'd like to see is a committee that's formed to plan and implement the project, that communicate about the project back to the rest of the community, that there is a real partnership effort that people are working together on the project. And it can be fairly broad. In the past, we had funded projects, for example, around community gardens or wellness efforts in the community, activities related to increasing physical activity, projects with elderly. So it's pretty broad, as long as the project is designed to address the major issues around improving health in the community. The applications are due on October 31st, and you can email those in and the contact information, or if you don't have access to emailing documents, you can also mail them in. We have examples of projects that are going on around the state that are around healthy communities projects, and those are on the Montana Rural Health Initiative website.
Okay. Are there any questions about the mini grant application?
I see that there's one on there. Yeah, the grants can go to a governmental organization or a nonprofit. For example, we've funded projects before that went to school. The school was the applicant, or the extension service, or public health, and other ones where it's been a nonprofit organization. And we are planning another Healthy Communities Conference in 2017. And in the fall of 2017, we're looking for a date for that now. And one of the ideas that we have is that projects through the mini grants would be part of that conference, that people would be presenting on the projects that they did through the mini grants.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I think that is everything we have today. Thank you to all the presenters for taking time to talk about this really interesting topic. I will send out a link to the slides and also a link to the recording of today's webinar. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey after we end here today. Thank you.
Thank you.